Ma'am, step outside. We got a trespassing call.
On my property?
Then show us some ID.
You're asking for ID at my own door?
Last chance. Step outside.
You really want to do this?
Ma'am, step outside. Now. Officer, I live here. This is my home. We have a report of suspicious activity. I need some ID. On what grounds? You have no probable cause to. Ma'am, step outside. The coffee was still hot. That was the detail Judge Anita Landrum would remember years later. The ceramic mug, warm between both palms, the steam curling upward in the blue morning light of her foyer when the pounding started. Not a knock. A pounding. The kind that rattles picture frames and wakes the neighbors 2 houses down. She had been standing at her kitchen counter, reviewing sentencing briefs for a 9 a.m. hearing, when the sound split the quiet open like an axe. What happened in the next 11 minutes would end 2 police careers, trigger a federal civil rights investigation that consumed an entire precinct, and produce body camera footage that would be played in congressional chambers, law school classrooms, and living rooms across the country. It would also nearly cost Anita Landrum everything she had spent 30 years building. Her freedom, her reputation, and the federal robe she had earned in a ceremony that made her mother weep in the front row. The Axon Body 3 footage would eventually rack up more than 40 million views. Legal scholars would debate it. Civil rights attorneys would cite it in briefs for a decade. And the 2 officers captured on it would receive sentences that legal observers called the harshest ever handed down for racial profiling and evidence tampering in the state's history. But none of that had happened yet. None of that existed yet. There was only the pounding at the door, and the steam from the mug, and Anita Landrum setting the coffee down on the counter and walking, calmly, toward whatever was waiting for her on the other side. Judge Anita Landrum was not a woman who frightened easily, which was fortunate, because very little in her life had been easy. At 54 years old, she had served 11 years as a United States federal district judge, appointed during an administration that broke 3 consecutive records for judicial appointments. Before that, she spent 9 years as a state prosecutor, building a conviction record that prosecutors in 3 neighboring states studied as a professional model. She had tried complex racketeering cases. She had withstood death threats. She had sat across from the most dangerous defendants in the region and looked at them with the same level, patient gaze she turned on everything. Juries, attorneys, bad weather, and bad men. She had lived at 4417 Millbrook Drive for 7 years. She had her name on the deed, her photographs on the walls, her coffee mug on the counter. That Tuesday morning had started the way most of her mornings started. Alarm at 5, a 4-mile run through the subdivision streets, a shower, the briefs, the coffee, routine. Quiet, the kind of morning that belongs to you and no one else. She had 43 minutes before she needed to leave for the courthouse when the pounding began. She set down her mug. She walked to the door. She opened it, and that was when everything started to go wrong. What happened next would destroy 2 police careers, send shockwaves through the justice system, and prove that even those who wear the robes of justice are not immune to the ugliest forms of prejudice. Officer McCarthy spoke first. "Ma'am, we need you to step off the porch. We have reports of a suspicious individual at this address." Anita Landrum looked at him the way she looked at attorneys who cited the wrong statute. Slowly. Completely. With the particular patience of someone who has spent a decade watching people talk themselves into corners. "I'm not stepping anywhere," she said. "This is my home. I've lived here for 7 years. Whatever report you received is false." The second officer, Miller, younger, with the restless energy of someone auditioning for a role he didn't fully understand, moved slightly to her left. Positioning. She noticed it the way she noticed everything. The way a federal judge notices when someone is lying on the stand before they've finished their first sentence. "We just need to verify that," McCarthy said. "ID, please." "On what legal basis?" "Ma'am." "Officer, I asked you a question. What is your legal basis for demanding identification from a woman standing inside her own home?" McCarthy's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being questioned at doorsteps. He was accustomed to compliance. The nervous shuffle, the quick retreat into the house to find a wallet, the eyes that dropped and stayed down. Anita Landrum's eyes had not dropped once. "We can do this easy, or we can do this the other way," he said. "Then we'll do it the other way," she replied. "Because I will not be providing you with identification to stand in my own foyer." She was still holding the mug. Both hands. The steam had thinned, but the ceramic was still warm, and she held it the way she held everything. Steadily, without trembling, like something she had every right to hold. What she did not say, in that moment, was that she recognized what was happening. She had prosecuted enough cases, presided over enough trials, to know the architecture of a confrontation being manufactured in real time. She could see McCarthy deciding something. She could see him calculating. And the thing that settled in her chest, cold and certain, beneath the warmth of the mug, was not fear. It was the knowledge that whatever he decided next was going to be very, very bad for both of them. She just didn't know yet how bad. McCarthy looked at Miller. Something passed between them that had no words. Then McCarthy put his hand on the door. "I'm detecting a strong odor of narcotics from inside this residence," he said. "That gives me probable cause to enter and conduct a search." Landrum did not move. "You smell nothing of the sort." "Step aside, ma'am. You do not have the legal authority." He pushed past her, not roughly, not with the full force of a shove, just the deliberate dismissive weight of a man who had decided that whatever she said next did not matter. He moved through her doorway the way someone moves through a door they've already decided belongs to them, and Miller followed, and suddenly there were two uniformed officers standing in Anita Landrum's foyer, between her and her own front door, and the morning had become something else entirely. She turned to face them. She was still holding the mug. "You need to leave," she said. Her voice was the same, measured, precise, the voice she used to read verdicts. "You have entered my home without a warrant and without lawful probable cause. You are trespassing. I am asking you to leave." McCarthy was already moving down the hallway, toward the back of the house. Miller stayed in the foyer, arms crossed, looking at the photographs on the entry table with the smug attention of someone browsing a garage sale. "Nice place," Miller said. He was looking at a framed photo of Landrum in her judicial robes at her investiture ceremony. The wide smile, her mother beside her, both of them caught in a moment of pure and uncomplicated joy. "Somebody's lawyer?" he said, nodding at the robe in the photo. "Get out of my house," Landrum said. "You people always got the fancy stuff on the walls," he said, not loudly. Almost conversationally, the way someone says something they've said 100 times before and stopped noticing the weight of. "Law books and diplomas. Like, that changes anything." From the back of the house, she could hear McCarthy opening doors. She stood very still. She had learned, over 30 years, that the most dangerous thing she could do in a moment like this was to react. Reaction was what they wanted. Reaction was footage they could use, a narrative they could build, a box they could put her in and close the lid on. So she breathed. She cataloged. She watched Miller's hands and listened to McCarthy's footsteps and said quietly, to no one in particular, "I need you both to understand that this is being recorded." Miller looked up at the small camera mounted above the front door, her own security system, installed 2 years ago after a string of car break-ins on the block. He smiled. "Sure it is." McCarthy came back from the hallway. He had been in her home office. She knew it from the direction his footsteps had gone, knew it the way you know the rooms of your own house by sound alone. She had 30 years of case files in that office. Her judicial appointment documents. A photograph of her with 2 sitting Supreme Court justices at a conference in D.C. He came back holding a business card. He read it once, then again. The color did not drain from his face exactly. It was more that something shifted behind his eyes, a rapid, terrible recalculation, the specific expression of a man who has just understood the size of the mistake he is standing inside of. The card read, "On, Anita J. Landrum, United States Federal District Judge, Southern District." The silence lasted 4 seconds. Landrum counted them. Then McCarthy did the thing that would define the rest of his life. He did not apologize. He did not step back. He did not look at Miller with the expression of a man preparing to retreat with whatever dignity remained. Instead, something hardened in him. A quick, ugly decision made in the space between one breath and the next, and he slid the business card into his breast pocket and turned toward the hallway and walked back toward her office. She heard a drawer open. She heard something placed. She heard the drawer close. If you've been watching this story and you already know where this is headed, stay with it. Because what happens next is the part that nobody who heard this story ever forgot. When McCarthy came back into the foyer, he was different. The calculation was gone. In its place was something practiced and cold, the expression of a man who had made a choice and was now going to commit to it completely. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm placing you under arrest." Landrum looked at him. "On what charge?" "Assault on a law enforcement officer. You threatened me with a firearm when I entered the residence." The air went out of the room. She heard herself say, very quietly, "That is a lie, Miller," McCarthy said. And Miller moved behind her and took the mug out of her hands and put her arms behind her back. They walked her out through her own front door, down the 3 brick steps she had swept every Sunday morning for 7 years, and into her driveway in her bathrobe, her hands cuffed behind her, in the blue early light of a Tuesday morning in June. A neighbor was walking a dog at the end of the block. The dog stopped. The neighbor stopped. A car slowed on the street, and someone had a phone out. The image, a woman in a bathrobe, hands cuffed, 2 officers on either side, a brick colonial home in a quiet subdivision, moved across the internet in under 3 hours. By noon, it had been picked up by 4 local news stations. By evening, it was national. The caption that traveled furthest was the simplest. This is what they did to her in front of her own house. Nobody who shared it yet knew she was a federal judge. That part came later. Inside the precinct, Anita Landrum sat in a holding cell in her bathrobe and did not speak to anyone except to ask, once, for a glass of water, which she received 30 minutes after requesting it. She had been booked on a charge of felony assault on a law enforcement officer. The specific language of the report claimed she had retrieved a firearm from a hall table and pointed it at Officer McCarthy upon his lawful entry of the premises. There was no firearm. There had never been a firearm in that foyer. But McCarthy had placed one there, in the drawer of the hall table, in the 11 seconds between reading the business card and coming back into the hallway. He had placed it carefully. He had worn his gloves, which he had put on before entering standard procedure, he would later claim. He had not touched the weapon with bare hands. He had thought about this. He had done this before. The precinct closed around him like a fist. By mid-morning, every officer on McCarthy's shift had been briefed. By afternoon, the union representative had made 3 calls. The official statement released at 2 p.m. described a, quote, dangerous early morning incident in which officers responded lawfully to a suspicious person's call and were threatened by the occupant. The statement described the firearm. The statement did not describe the business card. Landrum's attorney, a former federal prosecutor named Dennis Hale, who had known Anita for 20 years and received her call from inside the holding cell, arrived at the precinct at 11 a.m. and was turned away twice before being granted access. When he finally sat across from her, she told him everything in the order it happened, without embellishment, without visible emotion, in the same tone she used to deliver bench rulings. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. They're going to push for life, he said. I know, she said. Assault on a federal officer with a deadly weapon. Depending on how they frame it, mandatory minimums alone. Dennis, she said. I know. I've sentenced people under that statute. He looked at her. She looked at him. The camera, she said. My front door camera. I need you to pull the footage before they find out it exists. He nodded. He was already standing up. What neither of them knew yet, what McCarthy did not know, what Miller did not know, what the union representative drafting the cover story did not know, was that the Axon Body 3 camera on McCarthy's chest had been doing something quietly and automatically from the moment he stepped onto the porch. It had been uploading. Every Axon Body 3 unit issued to the department was configured to sync footage to a cloud-based evidence server every 15 minutes, a policy implemented after a lawsuit 3 years earlier in which local footage had been selectively deleted. The sync happened automatically, silently, regardless of whether the officer initiated it or was even aware of it. It was not something an officer in the field could disable from the device itself. McCarthy had known about the policy in the abstract, the way officers know about a lot of departmental policies. Distantly, theoretically, the way you know a fact that you've never needed to apply. When he returned to the precinct and deleted the footage from his device, he had believed he was deleting the record of the morning. He was not. The upload had completed at 6:34 a.m., 7 minutes before he placed the weapon in the drawer, and 9 minutes before he put Anita Landrum in handcuffs. The full 11-minute sequence, the porch, the entry, the foyer, the hallway, the office, the business card, the drawer, existed on a server in a data center in a suburb of Atlanta, intact and time-stamped and waiting. It was found by a 28-year-old IT contractor named Sasha Okafor, who had been hired by Dennis Hale's firm 3 days into the case, specifically to audit the department's digital evidence trail. She found it on a Tuesday afternoon, working from a laptop at a folding table in a conference room that smelled like old carpet. And when the file resolved and she pressed play and really watched what the body camera had recorded, she sat back in her chair and said, quietly, to the empty room, Oh, he's done. She called Hale at 4:47 p.m. He called Landrum's cell at 4:49 p.m. Landrum, sitting in a county jail jumpsuit on a cot that was 2 inches too short, listened to what he said and felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not quite, but the specific sensation of a door opening that had been sealed shut. She closed her eyes. She breathed. How clear is it? She asked. Anita, Hale said. You can read the name on the business card. The trial of United States versus Landrum opened on a gray Monday morning in October before a jury of 9 women and 3 men in courtroom 4B of the Millbrook County Courthouse, a building in which Anita Landrum had appeared dozens of times, as a prosecutor, as a visiting judge, as a colleague. She sat at the defense table in a dark suit, her hands folded, and watched the prosecution open its case with the confidence of people who did not yet know what was coming. The state's case was built on McCarthy's testimony, Miller's corroborating testimony, the planted weapon, and a use of force expert who had never met either officer and was being paid $1,400 a day. It was, Hale told Landrum privately, a reasonably well-constructed lie. The kind that worked when there was no footage. There was footage. On the fourth day of trial, Dennis Hale stood before the jury and said, "Your Honor, the defense would like to play People's Exhibit 14, the Axon Body 3 recording from Officer McCarthy's device, recovered from the department's cloud evidence server." The prosecution objected. The objection was overruled. The lights in courtroom 4B did not dim. Courtrooms don't do that, but the quality of the attention in the room changed, sharpened, became the kind of collective focus that only happens when everyone present understands that something irrevocable is about to occur. The footage played on a screen mounted to the right of the jury box. It began on the porch. It showed Landrum in her robe, both hands on the mug, answering questions with the precision and composure of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. It showed McCarthy's hand on the door. It showed the entry. It showed Miller looking at the photographs. It showed the hallway. And then it showed McCarthy in the home office, picking up the business card, reading it, and the expression on his face, that rapid, terrible recalculation. And it showed him walk to the hall table, open the drawer with gloved hands, place the weapon, and close the drawer. The footage was 14 seconds long from drawer open to drawer closed. 14 seconds. Clear as daylight. Time-stamped. McCarthy was sitting in the witness stand when it played. He watched it the way a man watches a building he owns collapse, with the full understanding that there is nothing left to do. One juror put her hand over her mouth. She did not lower it for a long time. The verdict took 3 hours. Not because the jury was uncertain. They told the foreperson they had reached their decision in 40 minutes, but because several members asked for time to compose themselves before returning to the courtroom. Not guilty on all counts. McCarthy was arrested on the courthouse steps. Miller surrendered the following morning. The charges, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, perjury, conspiracy, were federal, which meant sentencing fell under guidelines that offered very little flexibility and even less mercy. The judge who sentenced them was not Anita Landrum. She had recused herself from anything touching the case, but she was in the courtroom when the sentences were read, seated in the gallery in a dark coat, and the people who were watching her said she showed no visible emotion at all. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Just the patient, absolute attention of someone watching a process complete itself the way it was always supposed to. McCarthy received 22 years. Miller received 16. The city settled the civil suit for an amount that was never publicly disclosed but that legal sources described as generational. The settlement included a binding structural reform agreement that redirected a significant portion of the police department's annual discretionary budget to a new civilian-led public safety board. A board whose first chairperson, in a turn that was either poetic or inevitable depending on who you asked, was appointed by Judge Anita Landrum from her own bench. She returned to that bench on a Thursday in November, 4 months after the verdict. There was no ceremony. She had declined the offers of one. She walked in through the side entrance the way she always did, in her sensible shoes, with a thermos of coffee she had made at home, and she sat down, and she called the first case of the morning, and the room rose for her, and she told them to be seated. She had a full docket. There was work to do. The 2 photographs that circulated most widely in the weeks after the verdict were taken on the same morning, June 9th, 11 minutes apart. The first was the neighbor's photo, a woman in a bathrobe, hands cuffed, standing in her driveway in the blue morning light. The second was a still from the body camera footage, the same woman, standing in her foyer, both hands on a ceramic mug, looking at the officers with an expression of absolute, unbreakable composure. People kept putting them side by side. Law professors, journalists, people on the internet who had no particular reason to care about the Southern District Judiciary, but who looked at those 2 photographs and understood, without needing anyone to explain it, what they were looking at. They were looking at a woman who knew, from the moment the door opened, exactly what was being done to her, and who chose, instead of fighting it in the driveway, to let it happen, to let the camera record everything, to trust the system she had spent 30 years inside of to eventually, finally, do what it was built to do. She had bet her freedom on it. She had been right.